I tried avoiding my widowed ex-wife for 14 months, 3 weeks and 4 days, and I was doing just fine. But then she walked in as my blind date. There she stood, Nora Langley, my ex-wife, my greatest regret, and the most beautiful widow in every room she has ever entered. Framed in the doorway of the most romantic restaurant in Chicago, her dark eyes scanning the tables until they landed on me. The one man on earth she never expected to see sitting at that table, holding roses meant for a stranger. She froze. I stopped breathing. But here is what neither of us knew. 2 meddling best friends had set this up. An innocent 7-year-old was about to get involved, and a quiet man across town was already in love with her and not willing to walk away without a fight. I spent 14 months carefully, deliberately, and painfully avoiding the one woman my heart refused to stop choosing. The woman I divorced, the woman who loved again, the woman who lost again, my widowed ex-wife. But avoiding her was easy when she wasn't my blind date. Now she was standing 3 feet away from me, and every reason I had carefully built to stay away from her was crumbling in real time. Because what I saw in her eyes when she recognized me wasn't anger. It was worse. Let me take you back to how I got here. My name is Dr. Caleb Harrington, 38 years old, cardiothoracic surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. I open chests for a living. I hold broken hearts in my hands every single day and I fix them. Surgically, clinically, precisely. But I could not fix mine. I was married to Nora for 5 years. 5 years of her laughter filling our kitchen on Sunday mornings. 5 years of her falling asleep on my shoulder during movies she always pretended she wasn't tired for. 5 years of her setting 2 coffee cups on the counter every morning. 1 for her, 1 for me, even on the mornings I never came home from the hospital. And I repaid every single one of those mornings by being absent. Not physically. I was in the house. My shoes were at the door. My coat was on the rack. But I was never really there. I gave Nora a beautiful home, a generous life, and a husband whose mind was always somewhere else. In an operating room, in a research paper, in the relentless, hollow pursuit of being the best surgeon in the building. She used to say, "Caleb, I don't need the surgeon. I just need my husband." I used to say, "I'm right here, Nora." But I wasn't, and deep down we both knew it. So after 5 years of loving a man who didn't know how to love her back the right way, Nora Langley packed 2 suitcases on a Tuesday afternoon, sat across from me at our kitchen table, that same kitchen table where she used to set 2 coffee cups, and she slid the divorce papers across to me with hands that were trembling but eyes that were decided. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. That almost made it worse. She just said, "I deserve to be someone's whole world, Caleb, not their afterthought." And she was right. I signed the papers. I told myself it was the most selfless thing I had ever done. But God, and I mean that literally because I have come to understand that God sees everything we do in the dark, everything we tell ourselves in silence. God knew the truth. I signed those papers because I was terrified, not of losing her, of not being enough for her even if I tried. So I let her go. And for 2 years after our divorce, I watched from a careful distance as Nora slowly rebuilt herself. She reopened her interior design studio. She laughed again at Simone's ridiculous jokes. She started wearing color again. She used to only wear gray in our last year together, and I never once asked her why. And then she met Patrick Whitmore. Kind, patient, present. Everything I wasn't and everything she deserved. He looked at Nora the way I always should have. And within a year, she married him. I told myself I was happy for her. I told myself I had moved on. But God, again, knew better. Because 14 months ago, on a cold Thursday morning in September, Patrick Whitmore suffered a sudden brain aneurysm on his way to work, and by noon, he was gone. Just like that. Here today. Gone before lunch. And the woman I had spent 2 years quietly, secretly, shamefully still loving was a widow. Grieving again. Broken again. And this time, it felt like the universe was pointing a long, heavy finger directly at me and asking, "Are you ready to be what she needs now?" The answer that came out of me was the same cowardly answer I had always given. I stayed away. I told myself it was out of respect, out of decency. You do not walk back into your ex-wife's life 14 months after she buries her second husband and say, "I never stopped." That is not love. That is selfishness wearing love's clothing. So I avoided her. I skipped Derek's birthday dinner when I found out she would be there. I took a different route home every time I drove past Whitfield and Company, her design studio on Michigan Avenue. I deleted her number twice and memorized it both times without meaning to. 14 months. 3 weeks. For days. And then my best friend Derek Walsh sat across from me in my apartment on a Wednesday night, looked me dead in the eye over a bowl of reheated pasta and said, "I set you up on a blind date. Saturday. 7 o'clock. Rosewood Restaurant. She's perfect for you. Don't argue with me." I should have argued with him. I should have said no. But I was tired. Tired of empty apartments and untouched coffee cups and operating on other people's hearts while mine sat unopened in my own chest like a letter no one had the courage to read. So I said yes. I bought roses. I wore the gray suit Nora once told me made me look like a man worth staying for. I sat at table 7 at Rosewood Restaurant on a cold Saturday night in November. And I waited for a stranger who was going to be perfect for me. And then the door opened. And the stranger was Nora. My Nora. Standing in the doorway in a burgundy dress that moved like water, her dark hair falling just past her shoulders. Her eyes doing that thing they always did in the cold. Going deeper, darker, like the surface of a river just before winter. She saw the roses first. Then she saw me. And the world, I promise you, the world went completely terrifyingly silent. She didn't move. I didn't move. The restaurant kept breathing around us. Silverware clinking, soft jazz from the speakers, a woman at the bar laughing at something. But in the 6 feet of space between Nora Langley and me, there was nothing but the thunderous, deafening weight of everything we had never finished saying. And then I saw it. The thing in her eyes that wasn't anger. It was grief. Raw, unguarded, stripped open grief, but not for Patrick. Not tonight. Tonight, what I saw in Nora's eyes was the grief of a woman who had loved me, lost me, rebuilt herself without me, and was now standing in the cruelest possible place, face to face with the man she had never fully stopped loving either. And she looked absolutely terrified that I could see it. The maitre d' smiled warmly and said, "Dr. Harrington, your guest has arrived. Shall I show her to your table?" Nora's jaw tightened. I opened my mouth. And then her phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen and every last drop of color drained from her face. She looked up at me. Not with grief this time, not with fear, but with something cold and sharp and completely unreadable. She said, "I have to go," and she turned toward the door. I had spent 14 months avoiding my widowed ex-wife, but I had never once prepared for the moment she would be the one walking away from me. And somehow, God help me, that hurt more than any of it. She was already 3 steps from the door when something in me, something I had spent 14 months carefully suffocating, rose up like a fire that had never actually gone out. I stood up. The roses hit the table. The water glass trembled. The couple at the next table looked up. I didn't care. I said, "Nora," just her name. 1 word. 2 syllables. But the way it came out of me, raw and quiet and desperate, stopped her mid-step like I had reached across the room and caught her by the hand. She didn't turn around immediately. She stood there with her back to me, her shoulders rising slowly with a breath she was clearly taking to hold herself together. The jazz kept playing. Someone's dessert arrived at a nearby table. The world kept moving like nothing monumental was happening in the middle of Rosewood Restaurant on a Saturday night in November. And then she turned. Her eyes were glossy. Not crying, Nora never cried where anyone could see her, but glossy, like a window in the rain. She said, "Don't, Caleb." I said, "Don't what?" She said, "Don't look at me like that." I said, "Like what?" She pressed her lips together and looked away. "Like you're sorry. You've been sorry for 5 years. Sorry doesn't change anything." And there it was. Not anger. Not hatred. Just the quiet, exhausted truth of a woman who had loved me past the point of it making sense, and was standing in a restaurant she never asked to be in, holding her phone against her chest like a shield, trying not to fall apart in a burgundy dress in front of the man who taught her heart what loneliness feels like from the inside of a marriage. I took 1 step toward her. She took 1 step back. And then her phone buzzed again. This time she looked at it. And this time, I saw exactly what flashed across her face. Not cold, not sharp, just pain. The specific kind of pain that belongs to a mother, or a guardian, or someone responsible for someone small and precious. She looked up at me and said, "It's Lily." I frowned. "Lily, my niece. She's 7. I've been taking care of her since my sister's accident last spring. She's with Simone tonight and she's—" Nora stopped, exhaled. "She's asking for me. She gets bad nights sometimes." Something shifted in my chest. I said, "Go. Go to her." Nora blinked, like she hadn't expected that, like she had braced for me to make it about us. About this night, about these roses, about everything sitting unfinished between us. And instead I had just handed her the door without condition. She studied me for a moment. Really studied me. The way she used to when she was trying to decide if the Caleb speaking to her right now was the real one or the performed one. Then she nodded once, quietly, and she walked out. I stood there. The maitre d' cleared his throat somewhere behind me. I sat back down at table 7, alone, with a bouquet of roses and a half-filled water glass and the specific silence of a man who has just watched the most important moment of his life walk out the door in a burgundy dress. And then my phone rang. Derek. I picked up. Before I could say a single word, Derek Walsh. My best friend of 12 years. The man I trusted with my Saturday nights and apparently my entire emotional future. Said, in his usual loud, grinning, completely unaware voice, "So? Did she show up? Is she not perfect? I told you, man. I told you she was exactly what you needed. Simone swore she'd be there by 7. I said, "Derek," because Simone knows her better than anyone, and she said this woman is warm. She's been through a lot. She's ready to. Derek, move forward. And I just thought, you know what? Caleb needs someone who understands loss. Someone who... Derek. Silence. Then, yeah, I said, very slowly, very clearly. The woman Simone sent tonight. What is her name? A pause. Nora. Nora Langley. Why? Is something wrong? Did she not show? Simone said she would definitely. I closed my eyes. Derek. What? Nora Langley is my ex-wife. The silence that followed was so complete, so total, so magnificently catastrophic, that I actually pulled the phone from my ear to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then Derek said, barely above a whisper, "Bro." I said, "Yeah, bro. I know. Does Simone know she sent you your own?" "I don't think Simone knows you were involved at all." Another silence. Then, "Caleb, listen to me very carefully. This is either the worst thing I have ever accidentally done. It is. Or," he said, his voice shifting into that tone he only used when he was about to say something he actually meant. "God just did something you and I don't fully understand yet." I didn't answer, because the thing about Derek Walsh, the thing people underestimated about him underneath all the loud jokes and the terrible timing, was that every now and then, he said something that landed so precisely on the truth that you had to sit with it in silence for a moment. God just did something you don't fully understand yet. Now, before we go any further, if this story is already doing something to your chest, if you're already leaning forward, if something in you already knows this is about more than just a blind date, do yourself one favor right now. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notification bell. Because what happens next in Caleb and Nora's story is going to cost you sleep in the best possible way, and you don't want to miss a single second of it. I drove home slowly that night. Chicago in November has a specific kind of darkness, heavy and wet and close, the kind that presses against your windshield like it's trying to tell you something. The kind that makes a man think about every door he didn't walk through when he had the chance. I sat in my parked car outside my apartment building for 23 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on my dashboard change 4 times without moving. I kept hearing Nora's voice. Sorry doesn't change anything. And she was right. She was completely, devastatingly right. But here is what I had never told Nora, what I had never told anyone, what I had barely told myself in the 4 hollow years since I signed those divorce papers. I had changed. Not because I wanted to win her back. Not because of guilt. Not even because of the grief I felt when I heard about Patrick. though God knows that broke something loose in me. I had changed because 2 years after our divorce, I hit a wall that no surgery, no achievement, no award hanging in my office could fix. I had everything, and I was completely, clinically, devastatingly empty. And in that emptiness, for the first time in my adult life, I stopped running long enough to be still. And something found me in that stillness. I won't tell you it was dramatic. There was no lightning, no vision, no voice from the sky. It was just a Sunday morning, 6 months after Nora married Patrick, and I was sitting in my empty apartment eating cereal for dinner because I had forgotten to cook, and I picked up the small Bible my mother had given me at my medical school graduation, the one I had used as a coaster for 3 years, and I opened it. And I read for words that rearranged something fundamental inside me. God is near the brokenhearted. I sat with that for a long time. I had spent my entire adult life believing that strength meant needing nothing and no one. That self-sufficiency was the highest form of character. That emotions were variables to be managed, not truths to be honored. But sitting in that apartment, cereal going soggy in the bowl, I understood for the first time that I had not been strong. I had been afraid, and fear, dressed in discipline's clothing, had cost me the most important thing I ever had. From that Sunday forward, I started going to church. Quietly at first, slipping in late, leaving early, sitting in the back like a man who wasn't sure he deserved to be there. Then staying longer, then listening, then slowly changing, not on the surface but at the root, in the deep place where character actually lives. I became a man who called his mother, who apologized to the nurse I'd snapped at in 2019, who started noticing people, really noticing them, instead of moving through rooms like they were furniture between me and the next important thing. I became, I believe, the man I should have been when Nora was still mine. And then Patrick died. And Nora became my widowed ex-wife. And God, the same God who found me in an empty apartment over soggy cereal, put her back in my path on a Saturday night as my blind date. I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. But I also didn't know if Nora would believe in second chances. I walked into my apartment that night and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time. And then I did something I hadn't done in 14 months. Prayed for her. Not for us. Just for her. God. She's been through so much. More than she deserved. More than I ever helped carry. Whatever you're doing, whatever this night was, please be gentle with her. She's been through enough breaking. I don't know exactly when I fell asleep, but sometime before dawn, my phone buzzed once on the nightstand. A text. Unknown number. 3 words. I saw you change. I sat up, stared at the screen. The number had no contact attached to it. No name. No context. I saw you change. I typed back immediately. Who is this? No response. I sat there in the dark, pulse hammering, sleep completely gone, staring at a message from no one that somehow felt like it was from the one person in the world whose opinion of my transformation mattered most. I told myself it was a wrong number, but my hands were shaking. Monday morning came the way Chicago Monday mornings always do, gray and purposeful and with absolutely no interest in how your weekend went. I was walking toward the hospital entrance at 6:47 in the morning, coffee in hand, when I heard a voice behind me that stopped me dead on the sidewalk. Small. Hi. Completely confident. Excuse me. Are you Dr. Harrington? I turned around. Standing on the sidewalk behind me, backpack on, red coat buttoned slightly wrong, one sock higher than the other, was a 7-year-old girl with Nora's exact eyes and a gap where her left front tooth used to be. She looked up at me with the unnerving directness that only small children and very old people possess. She said, "My Aunt Nora cried last night. She never cries. But she thought I was asleep." She paused, tilted her head slightly. "Were you mean to her?" I stared down at this child, Lily, who had apparently arrived at my hospital at 6:47 in the morning to conduct a personal investigation on behalf of her aunt. And I had absolutely no idea what to say. Before I could form a single word, a breathless, horrified Nora Langley came sprinting around the corner in a winter coat and house slippers. "Lily and Brooks, do not move one single." She saw me. She stopped. Her hair was still half undone. She had clearly run out of the house at speed. There was a small smear of something that looked like peanut butter on her left sleeve. She looked at Lily, then at me, then back at Lily. She said, very quietly, very carefully, "How did you even know where?" Lily said, "Google. It was easy. His hospital has a website." Nora closed her eyes, and God help me, laughed, came out before I could stop it. Not a polite laugh, a real one, deep and sudden and completely unguarded. And when I opened my eyes, Nora was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face in 5 years, like she had just remembered something she thought she had lost. But it only lasted a second, because right at that moment, a silver car pulled up to the curb, smooth, unhurried, the kind of calm that belongs to a man who is never rattled, and the window rolled down. Good-looking, late 30s, warm smile aimed directly at Nora. "Nora, I got your message. I came as soon as..." He saw me. The smile stayed, but something behind it sharpened slightly. "I didn't know you had company." Nora straightened. "Brandon." Her voice was controlled. This is no one. We were just leaving. No one." I felt that word like a scalpel. Brandon looked at me for one moment longer than necessary. Then he smiled again, easy, assured. The smile of a man who is not threatened but wants you to know he is paying attention, and said, "I'll wait." Nora took Lily's hand. She looked at me once more, and in that look was everything. The Saturday night, the roses, the text at 3 in the morning, this sidewalk, this moment, Lily's gap-toothed interrogation, Brandon idling at the curb, all of it collapsing into one look that said, "I cannot do this right now." She turned and walked toward the car. Lily looked back at me over her shoulder, and that 7-year-old, with her mismatched socks and her missing tooth, gave me the most serious look I had ever received from anyone under 5 feet tall, and she winked. I stood on that sidewalk and watched my widowed ex-wife get into another man's car. And I heard Derek's voice from Saturday night playing back in my head like a prayer I hadn't finished. "God just did something you don't fully understand yet." Maybe, but I was starting to understand that whatever God was doing, it was going to require more of me than I had ever given. The question was whether I had become enough of a man to give it. I gave myself 3 days. 3 days to talk myself out of it. 3 days to be reasonable, to be mature, to be the kind of man who respects boundaries and reads rooms and does not chase his widowed ex-wife to her design studio on a Thursday afternoon because a 7-year-old winked at him on a hospital sidewalk. 3 days. I lasted until Wednesday morning. Whitfield and Company sat on the corner of Michigan Avenue and Erie Street. A warm, beautiful space with tall glass windows and soft lighting that turned everything inside it golden. Even in November, even under Chicago's gray sky. From the sidewalk, it looked like a place where broken things got put back together and made beautiful again. I stood outside for 4 minutes before I went in. The bell above the door chimed when I pushed it open. The studio smelled like cedar and fresh paint and something faintly sweet, vanilla, maybe. Fabric swatches covered one long table. Architectural drawings were pinned carefully across an entire wall. Soft instrumental music played from a speaker somewhere in the back. The receptionist looked up. Before she could speak, a small voice from the corner of the room said, "I knew you'd come." Lily, sitting cross-legged on a wide window seat, surrounded by colored pencils, a half-finished drawing on her lap, wearing the same red coat and still with one sock higher than the other. She said it the way only 7-year-olds say things. Like the outcome was never in question, and the only person who hadn't figured it out yet was me. I walked over slowly and crouched down to her level. I said, "Where is your aunt?" Lily pointed toward the back office without looking up from her drawing. I said, "Is she alone?" Lily's pencil stopped moving. She looked at me. "Brandon is in there." Something tightened in my chest. Lily watched my face process that information with the calm, scientific interest of a child who has seen too many adult emotions in too short a life. Then she held up her drawing. It was 2 figures. Stick figures, the way children draw them, round heads and straight arms, standing side by side under what appeared to be a yellow sun. Beneath the 2 figures, in the careful, oversized handwriting of a 7-year-old still learning how letters work, were 2 names. Caleb, Nora. I stared at it. Lily said, very matter-of-factly, "I drew this Saturday night, while Aunt Nora was crying and thought I was asleep." I said, barely above a whisper, "Why did you draw this?" She shrugged. "Because I prayed and asked God who was going to make her stop being sad. And then I drew what I saw." The studio went quiet around me. Just the soft music. Just the November light through the tall windows. Just this 7-year-old girl holding up a crayon drawing like it was a prophecy. I had to look away for a moment, because something was happening behind my eyes that a cardiothoracic surgeon who holds broken hearts for a living was absolutely not going to let happen in a design studio on a Wednesday afternoon. Cleared my throat. I stood up, and I walked toward the back office. The door was slightly open. I heard Brandon's voice first, measured, warm, the voice of a man who meant everything he said and knew how to say it well. "Nora, I'm not asking you to stop grieving. I'm not asking you to be ready tomorrow. I'm just asking you not to close the door on something real because you're afraid of what real costs." Nora's voice, quieter, careful. "Brandon, you deserve someone who can give you everything. I'm still putting myself back together, piece by piece. And I'm not sure all the pieces are even still there. Let me help you find them." Silence. Then Nora said very softly, "You are a good man, Brandon Ellis. You really are. But," a long pause, "but I think part of me has been using you as a reason not to look at something I'm not ready to look at yet." I stepped back from the doorway, because that sentence, "something I'm not ready to look at yet," landed somewhere in my chest that hadn't been touched in 5 years. I turned around, and I nearly walked straight into Brandon. He had come through a side door I hadn't noticed. He was carrying his coat. His face, up close, was the face of a man who had already made a decision. Not in anger, not in defeat, but in the quiet dignity of someone who loves something enough to put it down. We looked at each other. He said, calm, direct, no performance in it. "She talked about you, you know? Not by choice. Things just slipped sometimes. A song, a restaurant, the way she takes her coffee." He paused. "I told myself it was just grief. Patrick, then she'd been through a lot of loss. But grief and longing are 2 different things. And I'm a man who knows the difference." I didn't know what to say. He held out his hand. "Take care of her," he said. "Not the version of her you remember. The version she is now. She worked hard to become her." I shook his hand. He nodded once, and he walked out. The bell above the door chimed. Lily watched him go. Then she looked at me. Then she pointed back at the office. She said, "Go." Nora was standing at her drafting table with her back to the door, her hands flat on the surface, her head slightly bowed, the posture of a woman holding herself together with sheer, practiced will. I said her name. She turned. And for the first time since Saturday night, there was no restaurant full of people, no car pulling up to the curb, no child running around the corner. No exits, no distractions, no careful distance to hide inside. Just Nora. And me. And 5 years of everything we had never finished. She said, "Caleb, whatever you're about to say." I said, "I sent you something." She went very still. I said, 3 years ago, before Patrick, before any of this, I wrote you a letter. A real one, on paper, the kind you always said mattered more than texts. I wrote it, and I sealed it, and I held it for 2 weeks trying to decide if I had the right to send it. And then I heard you were seeing someone, and I told myself I'd missed my window, and I stopped. I never sent it. Nora's expression shifted. "What did it say?" "That I was sorry. Not the sorry I said when you handed me those papers. That sorry was just shock wearing sorry's face. The real sorry. The kind that took me 2 years of being alone and empty and sitting in a church in the back row like a man who wasn't sure God would let him in." My voice cracked slightly, and I let it because the man I used to be would have swallowed that crack and called it strength, and I was done confusing those 2 things. The kind of sorry that understands exactly what it cost you to love someone who didn't know how to love you back. That kind. The room was completely silent. Nora's eyes were glassy, still not crying, still holding, still so extraordinarily herself. She said, "Why are you telling me this now?" I said, "Because Saturday night, when you walked through that door, I realized that God, and I mean this, Nora, I mean it completely, God is not subtle. He is just patient. And I have been running from patient for 14 months because I didn't believe I had earned the right to stop running." She looked at me for a long time. Then she said something I was not prepared for. She said, "I sent you a text 3 days ago, Sunday night." My heart stopped. I said, "Unknown number." She nodded. "My phone broke Saturday night. I was using Simone's old one. I found your number in an old email and I just—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I don't know why I sent it. I almost deleted it 4 times. I saw you change. 3 words. Unknown number. 3 in the morning. I had prayed for her that night. And she had been watching me from a distance for longer than either of us had admitted. The sound that came out of me was somewhere between a breath and a word." She said, her voice breaking for the first time. "Finally, after holding it together through widowhood and divorce and Saturday nights and hospital sidewalks. I watched you, Caleb. I watched you become someone different, and I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that it was too late, that there had been too much damage and too much time and too many reasons why the door between us was supposed to stay closed. But," she closed her eyes, "but I have been standing outside that door for 3 months pretending I wasn't. I crossed the room, not rushing, not grabbing, just closing the distance. Slowly, the way you approach something sacred that you have no right to rush." I stopped directly in front of her. She opened her eyes. I said, "I am not the man who signed those papers. I want you to know that. Not because I need you to come back, but because you deserve to know that what you asked of me was not impossible. I just found it too late. And I am sorry it cost you what it cost you." A single tear ran down her left cheek. She didn't wipe it. I said, "I'm not asking you to forget what we were. I'm asking if you want to find out what we could be. The version of us that God apparently thought was worth a blind date, a 7-year-old investigator, and a text at 3 in the morning." The smallest sound escaped her. Somewhere between a laugh and a cry, the kind that only comes when something that has been held too tightly finally breathes. She said, "You drove me crazy, Caleb Harrington." I said, "I know. You were never there. I know. And you wore that gray suit on Saturday." I blinked. She shook her head slowly. "I told you once that suit made you look like a man worth staying for. And you wore it to a blind date. Either that was an accident." "It wasn't," I said quietly. She looked at me, and something in her face, something that had been braced and guarded and carefully maintained for 14 months, came gently, quietly, permanently undone. She didn't say yes with words. She said it by taking one small step forward and resting her forehead against my chest. And I put my arms around my widowed ex-wife in her design studio on a Wednesday afternoon in November, and I held her the way I should have held her every day of those 5 years. Like she was not a variable to be managed, but a gift I had no business taking for granted. We didn't say anything else for a long time. We didn't need to. From the doorway, a small voice said, "Finally." We both looked up. Lily was standing in the doorway holding her drawing, one sock still higher than the other, with the serene, satisfied expression of a 7-year-old who had prayed for something on a Saturday night and watched God answer it by Wednesday. She walked over, took my hand, took Nora's hand, and placed them together like she was completing a circuit. Then she looked up at me with those gap-toothed, ancient-eyed, completely serious 7-year-old eyes and said, "God told me you were coming. I just had to make sure you didn't chicken out." And right there, in a warm studio on Michigan Avenue, with cedar and vanilla in the air and soft music playing from a speaker in the back, I laughed. Nora laughed. Lily laughed. And it sounded, all 3 of us together, like something beginning. That was the day I stopped running. Not because I had earned it. Not because the math of our history suddenly added up. But because I finally understood what I had been too proud and too afraid to understand for most of my adult life. That love is not a reward for the worthy. It is a grace extended to the willing. And God, patient, unhurried, undefeated God, had been holding the door open the entire time. All I had to do was stop running long enough to walk through it. Nora and I did not fall back into each other overnight. We were not naive enough or dishonest enough to pretend that love alone erases the work that real restoration requires. We went slowly, deliberately, with honesty as our foundation and God as our compass. We went to counseling together and separately. We had the hard conversations at kitchen tables. We said the things we should have said 5 years ago and some things we had never said to anyone. Lily was the flower girl at our second wedding. She wore mismatched socks on purpose. And when the pastor asked if there was any reason these two people should not be joined together, she raised her hand, and then put it down, grinning. She said later she just wanted to make sure we were paying attention. We were. This time we were paying attention to everything. Before you go, I want to ask you something, and I want you to really sit with it. Have you ever loved someone, lost them, and spent years telling yourself it was over, when deep in a quiet, honest place you knew your heart had never actually let go? Or maybe, have you been the one who walked away from something real because you were too afraid of being hurt again to stay and fight for it? Drop your answer in the comments. You might be surprised how many people are sitting with the exact same weight you are. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a story can do is remind you that you are not alone in yours. And if the story moved something in you, if it touched something real, do not let it end here. Subscribe to this channel right now. Turn on that notification bell, because the next story we tell is already waiting, and it is going to hit even harder than this one. Every story on this channel is built for one purpose: to remind you that healing is possible, that love is worth fighting for, and that God has a way of arranging things that no human being would ever have the creativity or the courage to plan. Don't miss it. My name was Dr. Caleb Harrington. I tried avoiding my widowed ex-wife for 14 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. And then she walked in as my blind date. And God, patient, undefeated, quietly magnificent God, smiled, because he had known all along.